"Hi-ho, neighbor," a wise neighbor once said. That same wise neighbor also said, "Maybe you shouldn't try to have all the answers and instead ask more questions. You see, Tim, a truly wise man always has more questions than answers." And I have a few questions myself for Tim the Toolman Taylor, or at least the actor that played him, Tim Allen. But first, we'll be right back after a word from Binford Tools. Welcome to Capers and Cocktails, a true crime podcast that doesn't take itself too seriously and gives you something to enjoy while you listen. The following content may be disturbing to some. Discretion is advised. If you're enjoying one of our themed cocktails, ensure you're of legal drinking age and have fun, but drink responsibly. Tim Allen Dick, born in Denver, Colorado on June 13, 1953, grew up in a bustling household as the third of 6 children, 5 boys and 1 girl. Oof. His parents were Martha Catherine, a stay-at-home mom, and Gerald M. Dick, a real estate agent. As a kid, Tim and probably all of the Dick kids faced constant teasing because of their last name. A childhood friend would say that Tim had a good sense of humor and always had a good comeback to those comments. He also used his skills against adults. He would say, quote, "I could get the teacher to lose control. And the more the teacher lost control, the more I took control. Eventually, the teacher has to either swat you, light you on fire, or just kick you out of class." End quote. Okay, Tim. Tim would say his parents instilled in him a strong sense of community and hard work, and Tim's dad taught him everything he knew about cars. Tragedy struck the Allen family when Gerald was killed in a head-on collision with a drunk driver while driving the family home from a University of Colorado football game in November of 1964. Gerald was only 40 years old, and Tim was 11. Despite this loss, his family persevered, and 2 years later, his mother remarried to her high school sweetheart and moved the family to Birmingham, Michigan, near Detroit. This move brought its own challenges as Tim navigated the social dynamics of a new school and community. Tim has said the move meant going from, quote, "being in a cool group at one school to being at the bottom," end quote. Tim was also continuing to struggle with the loss of his father. He would say, quote, "After my old man died, I really just played games with people and told adults what they wanted to hear and then stole their booze. Really, I was Eddie Haskell. Yes, Mrs. Cleaver. No, Mrs. Cleaver. I knew exactly what adults wanted. Make your bed, be polite, use a napkin, and then I'd go steal everything in the house." End quote. In high school at Seaholm High in Birmingham, Tim found passions in theater and music, particularly classical piano. He graduated high school in 1971, and then he began his college journey at Central Michigan University before transferring to Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo in 1974. At Western Michigan, Tim immersed himself in radio and television production, working at the student radio station WIDR. When he was in college, he met and fell for a co-ed, Laura Dybel. In 1976, Tim graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Communications with minors in philosophy and design. After graduating, Tim got into a bad habit of dealing drugs. In 1978, Tim arranged a big drug deal with a guy named Michael Pfeiffer. Tim had seen this scene on TV of people putting drugs into lockers at airports and decided to try the same. He packed up a brown Adidas bag with more than 650 grams or 1.4 pounds of cocaine, which he was pretty thrilled to be exchanging for $43,000 or almost $200,000 in 2024 buying power. Tim brought the bag to the Kalamazoo Battle Creek International Airport on October 2nd, 1978, and put it into the locker, pulling out the key out of the lock. He walked up to Michael and handed him the key. Once Michael opened the locker and saw what was in the Adidas bag, Tim was suddenly swarmed by a horde of police officers. According to Tim, quote, "The next thing I observed was a gun in my face," end quote. Turns out that Michael Pfeiffer was not just a dude interested in a lot of cocaine. He was an undercover police officer that had been tracking Tim, the amateur drug dealer, for months. Instead of being instantly rich, Tim was instantly under arrest. Whoops. And Tim was in big trouble. Just a month before his arrest, Michigan lawmakers had passed one of the harshest drug laws in the country at the time, a law that was termed the 650 Lifer Law. This outlined that a conviction for delivering more than 650 grams of cocaine or heroin would yield you a life sentence in prison without the possibility of parole. This law would eventually set a precedent for mandatory drug sentencing laws across the country. The 650 lifer law was discreetly passed by politicians in Michigan who were keen to crack down on drug lords by sticking it onto the end of a massive public health bill that easily passed. This is a fairly common practice if you didn't know. But the 650 lifer law was problematic. Lawmakers apparently hadn't consulted Michigan judges. Judges were hamstrung by the new law as they were no longer allowed to use any discretion in sentencing, and instead it granted the power of discretion to the prosecution. Pretty much everyone eventually disliked the law, including judges, prison officials, attorneys, and even the bill's sponsors. Paul Rosenbaum, the bill's original sponsor, said, quote, "The statute is flawed because it eliminates a judge's ability to exercise discretion. It has been used to snare too many who fit the language, the letter of the act, but who in no way fit the intent, the spirit of the act," end quote. But despite their displeasure with the law, it was a law, and 23-year-old Tim was facing life imprisonment because of it. Heeding wise advice from his lawyer, Tim pled guilty to drug trafficking and opted to provide the names of other dealers to authorities in exchange for a lighter sentence. This was a very smart move that allowed him to be sentenced in a federal court rather than a state court, which would allow him to bypass the 650 lifer law. Lucky Tim. And it turns out that Tim's information helped authorities indict 20 people in the drug trade and resulted in the conviction and sentencing of 4 major drug dealers. They used the small fish to get the big one in this case, for sure. While he was awaiting his sentencing, Tim took a job at a local sporting goods store. A coworker there encouraged him to try his hand at stand-up in Detroit, and he did. And Tim was hooked. In November 1979, a judge sentenced Tim to 3 to 7 years in prison for delivery of a controlled substance and conspiracy to deliver a controlled substance. Tim became inmate 04276-040 at the Sandstone Correctional Institution in Minnesota. Whenever he could, Tim would use the inmates' gathering room as his own private theater to work on his stand-up. He even produced a comedy show while an inmate. Tim was a model prisoner, and he was released from the Sandstone prison on June 12, 1981, after serving 28 months behind bars. Laura Dybel stuck by Tim throughout his prison stay, and they were married in 1984. They would be married for almost 20 years and have a daughter together named Catherine. Tim's stand-up comedy would propel him into stardom as he became one of the most famous television stars of the 1990s in his role as Tim the Toolman Taylor on Home Improvement. Premiering in 1991, the hit sitcom aired on televisions across America for 8 seasons, with a total of 204 episodes. The show won many awards throughout its run, including a gaggle of People's Choice Awards and a 1995 Golden Globe Award for Tim's acting. Our drink today was chosen because, of course, we're toasting the tool man himself, and what better way to do that than with a construction-themed cocktail? According to Business Insider, the screwdriver cocktail originated from oil workers in the Persian Gulf a few decades ago, who secretly added vodka to their orange juice. Because they were, on the job, they didn't exactly have a spoon lying around, so they stirred their simple cocktail with a screwdriver. Okay, so it's possible this isn't the real origin story, but I like this one the best, so it's the one we're going with, all right? To make the cocktail, mix 2 parts vodka to 4 parts orange juice. Stir with a screwdriver or a spoon. Up to you. To make the mocktail, replace the alcoholic vodka with non-alcoholic vodka, and you're good to go. Ha ha ha. I did practice. Anyway, the 650 lifer law is still, law in Michigan. Legislators there have made small changes to it, but never completely fixed it. In the late 90s, they passed a bill that allows juveniles to serve 25 years without parole instead of their entire life. But that doesn't help inmates that were already sentenced under the law. Tim might have been lucky enough to have information that got him a reduced sentence, but others were not that lucky and remain behind bars. Speaking of prison bars, how does Tim feel about the crimes of his youth? He has said he wasn't proud of what he did in Kalamazoo in 1978, and that getting caught probably saved his life. In a more recent interview, he declared, quote, "I screwed up and I spent a little over 2 years in prison for it, and I learned my lesson, and I will never, ever sell drugs to a policeman again." No, I'm just kidding. End quote. Thanks for hanging out with me. I stumbled upon this story last year and was totally shocked that the Tim Allen that voiced a Disney movie, or 4, was a former drug dealer. I guess it just goes to show that everyone deserves a second chance, and that every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. All right, I know we do a lot of heists on here, but next week we have a different kind of heist, a pharmaceutical heist, and we have to be making a painkiller cocktail for that one. Be sure to rate and review Capers and Cocktails so that more people can learn about Tim the Toolman Taylor's illustrious past. I'll see you next week, and remember, there are always alternatives to selling enough drugs to potentially earn you a life sentence in Michigan.